So I'm presenting a novel phase 1 combination of ublituximab, which is a novel CD20 antibody that binds a different epitope in comparison to rituximab. Similar to the other novel CD20 antibodies, it's glyco-engineered to enhance ADCC, but it still maintains its CDC activity since it's a type 1 CD20 antibody. And it's being combined with umbralisib, which is a novel PI3Kδ inhibitor, and ibrutinib, which is a BTK inhibitor, in relapsed refractory non-Hodgkin lymphoma and CLL. This novel combination was rationally combined to overcome some of the resistance mechanisms that are emerging through targeting the B-cell receptor signaling pathway. With the addition of the CD20 antibody, we hope to enhance some of the ADCC, therefore the immune therapy approach as well. We enrolled patients with CLL that were both treatment naive and relapse refractory. Those comprised most of the patients that were enrolled on this phase 1 study, so 20 of the 38 that were evaluable for toxicity. Important to note, at least half of those patients had high-risk features, either 17p and or 11q. In regards to the NHL cohort, all of those patients were relapsed or refractory and had a median of 4 prior lines of therapy, so a heavily pretreated patient population. This was a standard 3+3 phase 1 design with dose escalation of umbralisib, this PI3Kδ inhibitor, but it was dose escalated whether patients were of NHL subtype or CLL, so there were 2 ongoing dose escalations. The ibrutinib was maintained at either 420 milligrams daily for patients with CLL or 560 milligrams for NHL. The ublituximab had a flat dose of 900 milligrams. Patients received up to 12 cycles of ublituximab, but they continued the umbralisib or the ibrutinib daily until they had disease progression or intolerance. Again, this is a novel phase 1 study, but so we had approximately 8 months of follow-up. With this, we had 38 evaluables for safety and 36 for efficacy. It's important to note with other PI3Kδ inhibitors that some of the safety profiles been seen with longer drug exposure, so at least half of patients had had over 6 months of therapy, so 81% had a median of approximately 11 months of follow-up. With this, the combination appears to be well tolerated. In regards to efficacy, 100% of CLL patients, mantle cell and marginal zone lymphoma, had responded with an overall response rate of approximately 83% for the total cohort.
And you mentioned the pre-treatment there. Was there any analysis of whether pre-treatment was predisposing some of the responses that you saw?
Yeah, so for the treatment naive, we saw partial responses. There were only 3 patients with CLL that were treatment naive. Of those, the majority had high-risk features. And those that had had prior therapies, again, at least half had poor risk features, and at least 2 patients had had both PI3Kδ and BTK prior exposure. Of those, 1 patient achieved a complete response that was durable for at least 1.5 years. So this suggests that the combination may overcome some mechanisms of resistance, albeit it's a small phase 1 study with dose escalation, and the follow-up is still relatively short. So it'll be interesting to see with longer follow-up if the favorable efficacy and toxicity holds up.
Are you plans to analyze pharmacokinetics of how these might be acting synergistically to overcome that resistance?
That's a great question. That was not planned initially with the study. Given the efficacy that we're seeing, those studies are now being launched. It's not uniformly being done across the study, but centers such as MD Anderson are actively exploring whether this is synergism or just a well-tolerated combination that's leading to efficacy.
And you mentioned some follow-up trials. Are there any names or doctors that we should be in touch with if we want to trace this up, say, in the near future, come ASH, perhaps?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing study. There are several ongoing studies with particularly umbralisib and ublituximab, including registration studies in CLL and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So we're hoping to see some of that data emerging. So those are larger, either phase 2 or phase 3 studies with randomization. In regards to this novel phase 1 concept, there is a dose expansion that is planned. It has not quite launched, so it'll probably be longer than ASH before we see any additional updates.